surveyed 100 Purdue specialists and asked them if what you're about to hear would be considered best management strategy and endorsed as university recommended practices.
Survey said.
Well, good morning. This is Joel Allman, Southeast Purdue Ag Center here in Butlerville. And I hope you found that introduction a little bit humorous. I try to have a little fun with it sometimes and just distance myself from make sure everybody knows that I'm not a true researcher. I'm just a farm manager here, have thoughts and ideas just like anybody else. And so this is not authentic research per se, at least it wasn't started out that way. And so as long as we have that knowledge going into it, I normally like to preface anytime I'm speaking, I got a great opportunity to put my foot in my mouth, so just know that's the case. But today I'm thinking I'm calling this the pickup style presentation, so you might as well get on in, and I'm trying not to talk your leg off too much. We're gonna hopefully you'll get to look out the window and see some stuff on this little trial we had. Let's talk about the background of the site a little bit. This is 2019, where we had a lot of rain that year, a lot of crop failure around, and these green streaks in here are all the corn that's left from a 40-acre planting, and it got so late we didn't come back to corn. So this field's highly variable. These oak clay tiles are random functionality would be a good way to put it. And so that's the site, a little history on it. We didn't farm or put any crop out in it that year. We were trying to fix the surface drainage on it, so we worked it and tried to land level it and different things like that. But you know, it's still highly variable, and so we were trying to make lemonade out of lemons. And what was the plan for this field going into August? What were we gonna do? Just let it sit idle, or should we try to put something out there and try to get some knowledge out of it? We do a lot of trials here at SEPAC and the end result is there's no significant difference. And while that's important, we need to know that there's also not much excitement in that. And I normally like these trials that we know we're going to get a yield response, whether it be nitrogen, drainage, variety, something like that. So that was sort of my mindset going into it. I wanted to get to where we knew we were going to have some type of response. On a personal note, I kind of find these extremely progressive cover croppers very interesting, and I watch a lot of conferences and things like that on YouTube and try to stay abreast of what their practices are. So these guys are from Indiana, Dan DeSutter and Rick Clark, and they're just some of many across the country that are swimming a different direction than a lot of us. And I think it's important that we keep our ear to what they're doing. I've heard a lot about fixation Balansa over the last 18 months or so. These guys are out there on the edge, and they've got a different paradigm that they're operating in. And if you listen to a lot of these conferences and things, one of the things they like to do is they'll challenge the land grant universities. And so I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think it's something we need to look at. We're always trying to understand new technology, new methods, and things like that. So I think that's a pretty good fit for us here, is maybe to delve into some of the types of things that they're doing. Another part of this story is the fact that I've sort of been charting our planting date as it relates to corn yield and over the last several years. And the long and the short of it is that we really don't see a trend with increased yield and planting early. In fact, there's been some years we've seen the opposite of that, where we've planted later and had a positive yield trend. So that's part of the background of this story as well. This field is T6, and that's the site we've been talking about. And you can see here in 2017 we had yield field average of 220. Out there in the middle, we're making 240, 250. So here's one of those fields over the years we are able to plant corn. We actually see a little bit of a positive benefit from delayed planting. Well, based off that background and some of the information we just went over, I think you can kind of get the idea that I'm not really scared per se of a planting date, and within reason. I don't think June 1st is the cutoff date or whatever that might be. At some point you're going to run out of time, but certainly the first part of June, the first half of June, I wouldn't be too concerned, and I'm not too concerned. So, and a lot of times, quite honestly, you don't get to pick your planting date. So if you want to raise corn, you have to fit it in that acceptable window. And so, based off the history of this field, knowing that it has a tendency to be planted later, let's put some nitrogen fixing legumes in there. Probably one way or the other, we won't be able to plant it anytime early in the spring, so we can let those legumes grow as much as possible and try to fix as much nitrogen as possible for the upcoming corn crop. So that was the idea behind this trial, trying to generate some return on cover crop. Randomized and replicated 4 times in this field. You got a 40-acre field. Basically, we've got 4 treatments that represent 8 to 9 acres in each treatment, and then we were going to follow that up with nitrogen to try to determine what the nitrogen contribution from the cover crops were. Well, just real quick here, I think costs are important, so you can just check it right here. These are the costs for each one of these seedings. Balansa at 30, a little over 30. Hairy Vetch by itself would have been 45. This mix wound up being 40, about $50, and then the Crimson was about 32. So that's the story on that. Just an as-applied map here showing that the trial was planted on August the 15th. Well, it was a very hot and dry August that year, and we got very little growth, wondering if we were going to have any emergence, and finally we got some here. This is the 9th of September, so some of these greener streaks in here, that's basically the oats that you see. There's a little bit of crimson here. It's pretty faint, but you can start to see it. The Balansa is not visible at this time. As we head into the end of September, the crimson is really starting to green up, and now it's the Balansa that's the faint looking areas, and then of course there's the oats there, so things really start to pick up for the crimson. Heading into January, the oats have already winter killed. I should have mentioned that we didn't have much luck with the Austrian or the winter pea. I've been told that maybe we had the wrong variety. I don't know if that's a fact or not, but there was basically no survivability of it, and sporadic vetch. So all that brown is the oats there, and of course these strips are crimson. Here's some Balansa here. Well, by the time the end of February came around, I could tell that we really had some winter damage. These areas in here are crimson. Look how light green they are. Now the greener strips now are the Balansa treatments. Here's some oats right here and vetch, and then guess what? We got no cover here, which is showing a lot of winter annuals. A little look at the end of March into what kind of drainage we're talking about here. I'm sure a lot of you guys around the area know exactly what kind of field we're working with. When the 1st of April rolled around, or about that time, the Balansa really started to become vigorous and aggressive, and I think this stitched flight here from around that time really shows the dominance of the Balansa across all the variability of the field. And so while the vetch and the crimson, it really struggled and was less vigorous in areas, a lot of winter damage, the Balansa seemed like it was unfazed. And so these really dark green rectangles that are running through here, that's Balansa. That shows the greenness and the biomass, uh, and how consistent it was compared to some of those other blocks. Nearly all the failure of the other two cover crops, the vetch and the crimson, or the not necessarily the failure, but in some ways just the lack of growth is due to drainage, as near as I can tell. And so there's very limited areas where we actually have decent drainage, and boy, there's stark contrast to anywhere we had an old clay tile that was still functional. You can see it kind of growth differences and just the vigorousness of the crop above those areas. Well, obviously I wasn't expecting this much damage to or lack of growth. I kind of in my mind back in the fall had envisioned we'd be working with stuff that looked like this, but that's part of it, is have those experiences and learn. But there again, there's just another clump there where we got a little bit of good tile drainage and really nice growth. We came in on the 28th of April to spray out this no cover, and we would have got on there earlier, but obviously this is a very wet site. We didn't spray in the fall these no cover strips because we wanted, we had worked to try to level this off. We didn't want it to start to erode away. So this is sort of what things look like. We got a lot of annual bluegrass, a lot of crest leaf groundsel in this no cover area, and then you can see over here this is a lot of annual bluegrass in this crimson oats, but here's some crimson here. You can see how sporadic, but look at this Balansa back in here. It's pretty consistent. I think this flight from May 7th really shows you the consistency or lack thereof of the plots. Where you see the dark color right through there, that's the crimson buds of the crimson clover. You can see these other dark greener clumps in here. That's the vetch. The rest of that's annual bluegrass, and boy, you can really see that the Balansa is pretty well solid all the way through. But some of these other covers just not doing what they should have done. Here's sort of the stark difference between the Balansa and the crimson as we get a little closer, in terms of what their growth was like. Well, by this time I started looking at this Balansa, and it was getting pretty massive. I mean, it was only maybe 24 inches tall or so, but if you dig down in there, this is a picture I pulled off Fixation's website. I mean, it's a white clover. It runs on the ground with stolons, and I mean, it's extremely aggressive on the ground. And when you grab a hold of that and pick that up, it's just a wad of mass there that it's really hard to explain. And so when you walk across it, it's like walking across the bubble wrap. It just hollow stems, snap, snap. And I started to wonder, started to get a little nervous about kind of our never really planted through stuff like this. And so I just thought, I need to try to talk to somebody that's dealt with this maybe a little bit and pick their brain. So I made a couple phone calls. I read an article about somebody that worked with it and called them. They were over in Illinois, and they said, I'll tell you what, that you can't kill that stuff. You can't plant through it. It's a mess. We dropped it from our program. We don't even work with it anymore. So that didn't make me feel too good. And I was able to get in contact with a couple guys that had success planting through it, and they pretty much told me to go for it. Don't worry about it. You can kill it. It's not a problem. Some of them are terminating it with a roller crimper or flail chopping it, or so these guys had a little bit more positive results with when they'd worked with it. So, but anyway, nonetheless, it was still a little bit nervous. Well, earlier that spring, my plan had been to spray some 15-inch bands through these different treatments, and I was going to hook that to the corn planter and just take the corn planter out there and just use it basically as an implement, just only to spray with, and spray these 15-inch bands through here. But the field was so wet we couldn't get that done. So this is the backup plan. I took our plot sprayer, and those guides that we fabricated there, they're 7.5 inches. That's how high the nozzles were supposed to be spraying above the ground to spray a 15-inch pattern. And so we put those on there, and the idea was we were going to spray these out, and then we were going to plant into them. And so this was our plot sprayer is a little bit of a homemade job, and we added all this stuff on there. I was a little bit worried it was going to fall apart, but anyway, this is what things look like. You can see I kind of had that above the canopy. Looking back, I wished I would have ran that down in the canopy a little bit more. The problem was the other treatments, there was no canopy there, and we can't run that sprayer very low, so we really need cover crop growth to try to maintain that 7.5 inch above, because we can't lower that sprayer down anymore. Well, here's 2 days after I sprayed with that configuration, and that's about what I wanted things to look like. You can see we got a sort of a dying strip in there, and then but then you come back 15 days later, and oh my, we really burn it a lot worse than I would have liked. Kind of a disaster there. You can kind of see that these other cover crop treatments, that we just burned them all out. There's a little bit of crimson there that had enough height that we could actually run those guides through there. But the Balansa is about the only one that kind of worked the way it should. And I'd have just hoped that crimson and vetch would have had some more height to it. Well, there you go. I hope that woke you up just a little bit. So that was what we planted into with that Balansa, and you could see that, even though that I kind of burned it a lot worse than I would have liked it, that stuff just regrew, and it was almost a true planting green situation. We got a 20-year-old 1750 John Deere planter, just a manual downforce maxed out. Try to maximize the seed depth as much as possible, because you're planting basically over about a 2-inch mat, and it pretty much planted right through it. There was no problems with that part of it, and so it was interesting that old 4040 tractor, every one of those treatments was different. So it kind of lugged down through that Balansa, and I thought the oats and that really planted about the best of any of those treatments with that oat stubble. I mean, it was crumbly, and it was a really good planting experience through that. But I don't know, just thought it'd be nice to add a little flair in there and let you guys ride along. So here's what, about 9 days after planting, this is what I had envisioned for all these treatments. And you can see we got an area where we got some good crimson growth, and so we actually have crimson in between the rows. And this crimson, it's so late in the year that this dead material in between these rows didn't die because of herbicide. It's natural senescence of the crop. This photo just shows a little bit of the contrast between, we got an oats treatment here on the oats and veg treatment on the left, and the Balansa on the right. Well, you had to hunt a few places where you could find where the vetch was still viable, where it actually had enough height that it didn't get burnt on that first spray. So here's just another little contrast here between the two treatments. The lack of vigor from the other crops, a lot of winter annuals started to compete, but this Balansa, it was smothering out almost everything except for maybe some of this dock, curly dock, or what my dad calls sour dock. But that's what you see in here is about the only thing. I mean, it pretty much wiped out all the annual bluegrass and just smothered it. So I do see this as a legume that's capable of weed control, but there's some of this dock in here that you can kind of see that it was able to poke through a little bit. And this point out that this Balansa is just natural death and decay here. This has not been sprayed yet. We didn't actually spray it until the 26th of June, and that's basically because it's too wet. So that's the way we operate around here, as most of you know, is you can only get on the ground when you can. Like I said before, just to reiterate that this brown material is just natural. There was some roller crimping action going on with the tractor and the planter, I think, in some respects, but here we are, June 22nd, and that's what our corn looks like, and that's a little bit later than even I feel 100% comfortable with. So we just have to see how things work out. This photo on the left, July 2nd, which would be about 2 weeks after planting or so, you can really see the amount of brown from that Balansa there in those strips, and the amount of material that was laying on top of the ground. And also should point out, in the meantime, probably around May or so, we began to partner with Dr. Armstrong, and he was sort of interested in what was going on, and he brought his team out, and he started collecting some samples and some data, and we sort of worked with him to try to refine what nitrogen rates he would like to see that we came back with. Here we are, July 6th. It's been about 2 or 3 days before side dress. You can see Balansa on the left and some crimson on the right, and point out that the Balansa was running at least a growth stage behind probably some of the other treatments due to the fact that it emerged a little bit later than the others. Let's talk a little bit about the nitrogen and the follow-up side dress. So everything got 40 pounds at starter. Every treatment got 40 pounds of N. So when we came back with side dress nitrogen, these are the 4 rates. So where you don't see anything being applied there, that was a 40-pound treatment, and all the way up to 210 was the maximum. So those are the 4 nitrogen rates. Here's a quick shot of what things looked in these 40-pound rates or 0 side dress treatments. You can look at the different cover treatments, and then how much firing we've got a little bit ahead of tassel. So these plants are just about at tassel at this point, or getting close to it. I've been taking several stitch flights when I could, and you can see here that some of these 40-pound treatments are really starting to show deficiency. We can overlay things in the software and pull out what we need to look at. It was evident early on that just from observation that the 0 Balansa treatments, which I've got outlined in red here, they don't show that pale color. I mean, there should be 16 of those pale rectangles in there, and the Balansa, you can see not quite the paleness of the other treatments. Well, I promise I won't do that to you again, but I told you you were going to get some windshield time, but I think that's the last one we got for this go around, so you can relax now. And let's talk a little bit about the weather. And one thing that's kind of surprising this year was, we first part of August, we're not even getting in 80-degree highs, that's not doing much for our heat units and trying to get this late planted corn going. And you couple that with the fact that, we've got consecutive days in a row with cloud cover. We can't build that photosynthesis factory that we need to get things moving and accelerating on the growth side. And then, you know, we got some satellite images of this field and others, and we actually got an alert in August that, that said, hey, we don't have any images for you for the last 10, 12 days. I can't remember what it was, but, just due to excessive cloud cover. So definitely not a good August growing conditions that we need for late planted corn. Let's take a look a little bit on the rainfall situation. So from about the 15th of August all the way up to October 15th, so about 60 days here, we only got a little over 2 inches of rainfall total in those 60 days. And you can see that, a lot of those rains were not much. So, I think the maximum amount we got was maybe like a ½ inch there on the 18th. So we were getting little increments throughout those 60 days, and that I was starting to wonder how much drought stress was starting to play a factor as well. Then Mother Nature started, thinking about getting cold, and that's always a concern when you've got that kind of late planted corn. Here you can see on the 5th of October, we're dipping underneath, freezing here for a little bit of time, and so I think that might have touched us up just a little bit there, but not too much damage. But definitely a little bit too frosty there on the 5th of October. Now here's a shot about 4 days after that, and you can see we still got a lot of green corn left out here, and we're wanting to keep Jack Frost at bay as much as possible so we can finish this thing off. Well, we finally got hammered about the 17th of October, and we got down to about 28 degrees, and you can see right here is 32. And I've been told that you can get varying amounts of frost damage at 32, and it kind of depends on the duration of how long you're at that kind of temperature. But if you get to 28 degrees, you basically kill the stalk. Even for just a little bit of time at 28, you're going to kill the entire plant. So we did hit that, and I was doing some checking here, University of Wisconsin, and we hadn't black layered yet, and so you can kind of see what the estimated damage might be on something like this on a crop that hadn't naturally matured on its own. This is a shot of Balansa treatment a few days after that event. So I've kind of showed you around, showed you what things look like, and talked a little bit about the weather. And this was, if we were in person, I'd kind of ask you, well, what do you think? What do you think on some of these nitrogen treatments and what kind of yields we would wind up with? So I can't really interact in that way. So just ask yourself, give your best guess on what you think 40 pounds of starter N by itself would yield. And there's the no cover treatment, the oats and vetch, crimson, and the Balansa. So I guess I wonder how that would aligns with what you were thinking before we went and I showed you these yields. Let's go on to the next one, the 105 N rate. How do you think the corn responded? Additional 60 pounds of N across these treatments. And then another N rate increase Let's see what it does. And then finally, our last end treatment, which we would consider our agronomic optimum in an average year, whatever that is. But this is typically what we would say would be agronomically optimized grain yield. Let's check that out and see how we did. And so if you just kind of take that in for just a second and ask yourself, is that kind of what you were thinking things would turn out to be? Well, these were some of the questions I was asking myself as I sort of reviewed the initial data. And, down here on the lower end, we had quite a bit of separation, and that kind of made sense to me. But I thought we could have got this curve on the Balansa. I thought we could have got it peaked out, maybe somewhere in here. And the fact that we didn't really get it until we were up into some higher end rates, and kind of like this guy again, trying to figure it out, understand what really transpired. Well, maybe at this point I figured you might be asking yourself or thinking maybe three different things. And one of those is, what do you think happened? And I guess I really don't know, but I have some ideas, I guess. And the weather didn't really cooperate totally there at the end. The planting date was a little bit later than you want. V1 at June 22nd is probably not a good place to be, or VE, or where we were at. We were running behind, and the plant stands and some of that residue, heavy residue, was probably not perfect. So that's going to cost us a little bit. And then a couple things just on the nitrogen side of things is, if I had to do it over again, if the weather would allow, I'm not going to let that Balansa go all the way and complete its life cycle. And so there at the end, I showed that that was some pretty brown stuff, and yeah, it produced a lot of nitrogen, but it was also starting to get the C to N ratio out of whack, and maybe tying some of that up, not making it nitrogen available to the plant, the corn plant. And then, the timing of the termination strips to when we planted, it was over a month. And, I think we probably lost some of that to volatilization, denitrification. I mean, there was a smell around here for several weeks after we tried to spray those 15-inch bands in there. So those are kind of some things. And I think the most important thing is we got to be careful when we read into some of these treatment means or averages and things like that. That's not been, that's not had statistical analysis. I'm just showing you the raw data there. So we don't know for sure, even though numbers are higher or lower, they may not be statistically different. So that's something to keep in mind. The second thing you might be thinking is, you're an idiot, and you're probably right. I'd agree with you. I mean, you have to have some kind of a cover crop slant or interest to go into this kind of deal. And being this is a no-till breakfast crowd, I figured you guys would probably have that sort of slant. You got to take crop insurance. That's what everybody's thinking, right? You got to go into prevent plant. There's no way I'm planting June 13th. And I am an idiot on the crop insurance. We don't take it here. I don't understand, the dates, the rates, and all that kind of stuff, and the percentages, and so I am totally in the dark on that. The no cover treatment was way too weedy. I can't really argue that too much. That should have probably had a fall spray on it, although I'm not sure that would have had an effect in terms of yield. I'm not convinced of that. We've got other ground around here that we had fall sprayed, and we had good weed control on, and we really couldn't get in the field any earlier. So I don't think that would help this dried out or anything, really, not to the extent of the kind of moisture and the kind of ground that is. You can't seed cover crops in mid-August. I mean, that's unrealistic. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And maybe you're asking, well, what do you think you gleaned from this, or what do you think you learned? Well, one thing, was part of this was just to try to get outside comfort zone with cover crop. And I got a little bit of experience now, maybe not as much as those guys that are super progressive, but we've sort of dipped our toes in some of this planting green and corn and things like that. And I don't know what the future holds. They talk about organic things here, trying some organic things, and with the regulations, who could see in 20, 25 years, you think it's possible they could cap the amount of nitrogen that we're allowed to put on? I mean, I hope that's not the case, but I don't think that's a stretch to think that might be coming down the road someday. So, how are we gonna supplement that, or is there alternatives that we could use to mitigate our synthetic nitrogen use? One of the interesting things I think is that we had a field here that is historically yields very well, and we try to target that as kind of our high yielding field, and we got it planted to corn April 21st, and it had good stands and things were off to a good start. And guess what? It got frosted May 7th, and it wound up yielding about what the top end of this field here did. So I think it's ironic that you try to do everything right. You try to burn things down and go into a clean field and plant at the right time and all that kind of stuff. And so there's risk involved no matter what. And as ironically, that field got frosted on the front end, and this field here got frosted a little bit on the back end. Don't know what that frost really did to us. Maybe it took 6% off. That Balansa was delayed. I showed that, about a growth stage behind. So I think that frost hurt it worse than the other treatments. The other thing this little trial did is sort of reinforced the need for adequate drainage, and its effect. If where you have adequate drainage, you're going to have more effective nitrogen usage, in my opinion. And then I still think there's potential in southeastern Indiana, and there's kind of a map there that shows the fragipans. The right kind of ground. This Balansa, I think it has some potential here. It has the potential to smother weeds, and its potential to perform on poorly drained soils consistently. So I talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Then finally, I hope Dr. Armstrong comes on here and he can get into the more of the what happened and help us to try to understand maybe what's going on and how we can adapt our management to get into a better position to maximize the benefits of this cover crop. Real quick here, let's check the plant stand issue. And we flew V3 here with this AgRemo app, and I didn't ground truth this per se, so you can kind of take it for what it's worth, but it's ironic that this thing picked up all the Balansa treatments as good. That's those solid orange brown type blocks out here, the 16 rectangles, and some of that red stuff is pretty well poorly drained bad areas. And so anyway, it was starting to separate those treatments out in terms of stand. And then I did see some of this where we had some vole damage, and it had actually eaten a lot of this row here all the way through. So yeah, that was happening. I can't quantify per se what the impact was, however. I want to touch base real quick on trying to seed the cover crop mid-August. Okay, this is kind of a busy slide, but we're going to go through it real quick. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the crawdad flats, the buttermilk flats, the gray flats, the slash ground, whatever, Claremont, Cobb's Fork, whatever terminology you use, we have that kind of ground here. And I'm saying there's opportunity here. You don't have to have wheat in a rotation. And you can see here 2018, that was a really good growing season. Okay. And that's the one you want to order at the drive-through when they ask you what kind of growing season you want. At least around here, I'm gonna say we want the 2018. So what we have here, these solid lines up here, that's the total number of corn acres planted for 3 counties: Jefferson, Jennings, and Ripley County. And these bars here, these bar graphs, that's how much preventive plant acres, okay, for that particular season. And so you can see in 2019, which that was a terrible year, that here in Jennings County, we planted a little shy of 20,000 acres of corn, but we had over 17,000 acres of prevent plant. So almost 42% of our intended corn acres were idle. We didn't plant them. You know, here's Ripley County in 2019. They were, I don't know, somewhere around 27, 26.5. There again, they had 17,000 acres as well, prevent plant. Last year wasn't near as bad as the disaster of 2019, but you know, you still have, you know, 6,000-7,000 acres here that we're not getting planted. So that's where I think this kind of fits in. You're gonna have an opportunity, you know, maybe not every year, but you can kind of bank on having some of that. So why not try to do something to prepare for next year? So that's my kind of thoughts on the window of opportunity for Southeast Indiana. I think the biggest thing, it just, you know, reiterates or hammers home, is that, you know, if you got an ideal situation, you want to have good drainage, you want to have a good planting date, you know, you want to have good cover crop growth, you want to have a good stand. All these things got to line up to maximize your productivity, and it kind of starts with draining the ground. These old guys here laying clay tile, and that's, you know, that was part of our field out here that we were working with, had some of that still functioning. And I've sort of highlighted right here this area of the field. You can still see the green streaks. That's the crimson and vetch and things that's responding to those old clay tile, and kind of blew it up over here in this photo. But I wanted to go back and look and see, you know, where the highest yields from this, you know, we had 64 plots out here, where the highest yields come from. So here's where number one came from. It was a crimson treatment, 210 pounds in. It came in at 226. Oats and vetch was right in there with that. It was a 210 pound treatment at 219. And then this number 3, this is the one that, you know, we want to talk about. Had 64 plots out here, lots of we had 16 treatments that were 210 pounds in, but this 168 pounder came in at number 3. And so that just shows you, you know, you can get that good growth on the cover crop, producing more nitrogen. Then, you know, maybe, you know, you're just more efficient that way. And so, you know, that's a good plot there. But you can see the top 3, look at the location that they came from in the field. And so it's a drainage dominated site, and that's what it showed. I just picked up, looking at the top 10 here. These are the other ones that were not 210. So this oats and vetch here was a 168, and it came in at 210 bushel the acre. And then this number 9 up here came from a Balansa 168, and it yielded 208. So if nothing else, you know, I'd like to have everything drained, and if possible. Well, I hope you enjoyed riding around today, and we talked about some stuff, and I hope you remember that's just a 1-year observations and windshield time there with looking at this study. So we can't take everything to the bank on this, but I do think it's important just to have a little discussion and talk about what was happening here, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.